Welcome to late 18th century America, a country still newly born but passionate in its autonomous ideals, and rapidly growing not only physically but in achievements as well. From scientific discoveries to radical religious and political discourse, the United States had easily been able to establish itself in almost every field imaginable within its short time as a sovereign nation. Well, keyword being almost. Even as Americans lauded their revolutions in science and politics, they were not as willing to separate themselves from Britain culturally, especially regarding language. The public schools that Horace Mann had newly introduced to the country used British grammar books that taught Latin rules that didn't really work with English. Most importantly, people still relied on British lexicographer Samuel Johnson and his work A Dictionary of the English Language, published in 1755. A book including over 40,000 words and their definitions. It was praised by the public as something groundbreaking, and was still accepted as such nearly half a century later. And then, a fiery young schoolteacher put pen to paper and said otherwise. In a series of passionate letters, he pointed out that Johnson had injudiciously inserted a number of vulgar and obscene words into a book children learned from, and had included between 2,000 and 3,000 useless words that belonged to dead languages. And above all, he furiously called attention to how Johnson had merely copied his etymologies from other authors, and thus never acknowledged the still continuing development of the English language. And finally, he declared that America must be as independent in literature as she is in politics, as famous for arts as for arms, and it is not impossible but a person of my youth may have some influence in exciting a spirit of literature. His name was Noah Webster, and that was the birth of the American Dictionary. Noah Webster Jr. was born on October 16, 1758, in Hartford, Connecticut. His father was a farmer, but both of his parents greatly valued education. He was accepted into Yale in 1774, interrupting his studies briefly to serve in the Revolutionary War, and graduated in 1778 with a desire to study law. However, a lack of funds held him back, and he instead ended up as a teacher. It was then that he realized how poor quality school textbooks were, and so took it upon himself to produce his own. The resulting product, a grammatical institute of the English language, nicknamed the Blue-backed Speller, was published in 1783, and remained the standard language textbook in American schools for the next century. It was a uniquely American approach to teaching grammar, as it taught standard English with common words, and without Greek or Latin as a prerequisite, or any of the linguistic elitism that British aristocrats favored. It also featured some phrases that Webster was the first to introduce, the most common of which being, "It's me," used to replace "It is I." The book was also arranged so that it progressed with age, starting with the alphabet and staying easily understandable with every level. While these differences caused some backlash, the Speller still became the most popular American publication of the time, selling over 60 million copies and teaching 5 generations of American children spelling and reading. It was a wonderful achievement for Webster, but it also supplied him with the money for the next goal that he'd set his eyes upon, a dictionary. Webster first published his intentions to compile his own dictionary in 1800, and was immediately hit with heavy criticism. The largest opposition came from members of his own Federalist Party, men who loved England, hated France, and disliked democracy. Webster was a passionate Federalist during the war, calling for a centralized government enough so that he was given the nickname monarch by his peers. But when it came to the dictionary, he radically took the stance of a Republican, stating that it was the common people and not a select few who formed the language and established its rules. Federalists hated this idea, and so did English writers, who were also annoyed at Webster for claiming that his dictionary would surpass Johnson's. And the Republicans attacked it because they hated Webster's federalism. But Webster mostly ignored the political scorn because he had bigger things to worry about, namely, writing the dictionary itself. In preparing his dictionary, Webster was once again frustrated with how no one had ever prepared a reliable guide to the spelling, pronunciation, and grammar of the English language. After 6 years of study, he had satisfied himself that he had a full understanding of those principles, and even published a small dictionary entitled A Compendious Dictionary of the English Language in 1806. Although considered little more than preparation for the much larger project that lay ahead, Webster still defined an impressive 37,000 words, and it's credited with being the first major dictionary in history to list I and J as well as U and V as separate letters, when before they were seen as exchangeable. He once again ignored backlash and began work on his American dictionary the following year. But yet again, he found a sore lack of study in etymology, the part of philology which explains the origin of words. He examined some of the languages he'd already studied, such as Hebrew, Anglo-Saxon, and Gothic languages, only to conclude that he needed more references for his real dictionary. As he wrote to a friend, "I adopted a new plan of investigating, that of examining and comparing the primary elements, articulations, or consonants of words in 20 different languages." And indeed, after a decade of studying, Noah Webster had mastered 8 languages and acquainted himself with 26. Even with his extensive investigation of etymology, he continued to add to his dictionary, this time not only focusing on changing spellings or definitions, but instead on adding new words entirely. To do this, Noah Webster traveled throughout America, listening to people's speech and trying to decipher their influences as he wrote words down. Native Americans gave the words moccasin, canoe, moose, and maize. From Mexico came stampede and cafeteria. From French, prairie and dime. And from the Dutch came cookie and landscape. Existing words were combined to make new ones, like rattlesnake, eggplant, and bullfrog. Settlers in the West derived mesa and canyon from Spanish, and came up with their own words and expressions such as cahoots and kick the bucket. There were also brand new words: gimmick, fudge, notify, currency, hindsight, graveyard, and even political terms such as presidential. Finally, Webster went to France in 1824 to add new scientific terms to the dictionary as well, such as sulfur and aluminum, something never done before, but he felt necessary, as science should be common knowledge as well. Finally, Noah Webster wrote the last word of his work in January 1825 in Cambridge, England, officially publishing it 3 years later as the famous American Dictionary of 1828. It took him almost 30 years, but it was finally done. Of course, there was some outrage that greeted the publication, mainly in Webster's new spellings that he made in a goal of simplifying the English language to exclude unnecessary letters and words. Some of these spellings do seem a bit strange to modern eyes, like women for women, mean for mean, and bread for bread, but it's the eventual success of his dictionary that is the reason Americans today spell words such as favor without a U, theater with ER, sulfur with an F and not a PH, aluminum without the second I, and music in public without a K. Webster died on May 28, 1843, and the rights to his dictionary was bought by Merriam Publishers, continuing his legacy even today with the Merriam-Webster dictionaries. Each of the 70,000 words in his original dictionary is a testament to Noah Webster's dedication to language and to his country that he'd now given a voice to. The dictionary fostered a new wave of American literature. Famous poet Emily Dickinson even described the book as her best friend. And so, Webster ultimately revolutionized American English with the same ideals of the American Revolution. Just as human geography and environment had inspired America's political independence, so was the American Dictionary inspired to give it cultural independence. After all, Noah Webster once said that a national language is a band of national union. Popular sovereignty in government should be accompanied by popular usage and language. And thanks to Webster's decades of extensive study of multiple languages, perspectives, and American culture, the American Dictionary of 1828 achieved just that.